Imagine that you are stranded in the middle of the ocean. You have to survive for 5 days without food or drinking water. Hundreds of sharks are circling around you and can attack at any moment. It seems impossible to survive in a situation like this. But this is exactly what happened to hundreds of people in 1945 during the war between the United States and Japan. Let us go back to 1945. At that time, a war was taking place between the United States and Japan. It had already been going on for several years. People hoped that the war would soon come to an end, but a terrible event was still ahead, and the whole world would later talk about it. It would happen in the middle of the ocean. At night, an American warship sailed into the ocean. More than 1,000 military sailors were on board. Their mission was to deliver secret cargo to an island where a United States military base was located. The cargo was successfully delivered to the island. The mission had been completed, but the ship still had a long journey back across the ocean. It was important that the return trip remained unnoticed. Inside the cargo were important components for a nuclear bomb that would later be dropped on civilians in Japan. At that time, it was one of the most secret weapons in the world. After delivering the cargo, the ship sailed far away from the island and was once again alone in the middle of the ocean. The nearest shore was hundreds of kilometers away. It seemed that the most dangerous part of the mission was already over. But deep beneath the water, a Japanese submarine was watching the ship and waiting for the right moment to attack. The ship was trying to move quietly and remain unnoticed. The crew did not realize that a Japanese submarine had already spotted them. The moment it had been waiting for had arrived. Several torpedoes were fired at the ship. 2 of them hit their target. Powerful explosions shook the ship. Within just a few minutes, the ship began to sink beneath the water. Many people were killed immediately after the explosions. The rest were left stranded in the middle of the ocean. About 900 people were now in the water, but none of them knew that 5 days of real horror were still ahead. The sailors tried to report the disaster and call for help, but no rescue teams arrived. Because the mission was highly secret, the ship's location was kept as secret as possible. As a result, no one noticed that the ship had disappeared in the middle of the ocean, and for a long time nobody knew that a disaster had happened. When daylight came, the situation became even more difficult. The bright sun shone constantly over the ocean. Its rays reflected off the surface of the water, making sunburns even worse. The sailors spent many hours under the sun and had nowhere to hide from it because there was only water around them. With each passing day, their skin became more badly burned. At first, it turned red and became very sensitive. Then, blisters began to appear. Even a light touch caused pain. Salt water constantly reached their burned skin and caused a strong burning sensation. Some sailors felt this pain almost all the time. At night, the sun disappeared, but the situation did not become any easier. After spending a long time in the water, the body slowly lost heat. Even if the water did not feel very cold, it still gradually took heat away from the body. Water does this much faster than air. Because of this, the sailors began to feel cold. But the biggest problem was thirst. A person can survive for several weeks without food. Without water, a person can die in just a few days. Unable to endure the thirst, some sailors began to drink seawater. 1 glass of seawater contains about 2 teaspoons of salt. The human body cannot properly process such a large amount of salt. Severe dehydration affects the way the brain works. Some people began to experience hallucinations. According to the survivors, many of them reported seeing rescue boats and land on the horizon. It is possible that the brain was trying to preserve hope for survival. When a person finds themselves in such a difficult situation, the mind can create images of what they most want to see in order to keep fighting for life. There were more and more dead people in the ocean. The smell of blood spread through the water. Sharks can detect these kinds of smells from very long distances. At first, there was only one shark near the sailors. Then another appeared. Then another. With each passing day, there were more and more of them. And this was only the beginning. According to the survivors, the sharks first approached people who had already died. In panic, many sailors tried to swim away as quickly as possible, creating a lot of noise and splashing in the water. That was when the sharks began to pay attention to the living. According to experts, sharks are attracted to sudden movements and strong splashes in the water. That is why people are advised not to panic or try to swim away quickly when they encounter a shark. The more noise and movement a person creates in the water, the more likely it is to attract the attention of a predator. Years later, when specialists began studying documents and survivor accounts, they were shocked by the scale of the disaster. More than 100 people were eaten by sharks during that catastrophe. Today, this event is considered one of the largest shark attacks on humans in history. Only on the 5th day did something happen that many people had almost stopped hoping for. An airplane appeared in the sky. It was an American pilot. He was not searching for survivors and had arrived in the area completely by chance during a routine patrol flight. A huge dark patch on the water caught the pilot's attention. The pilot realized that there were people still alive in the ocean. But when he looked more closely, he saw many shark fins among the people. Some of the sharks were already attacking them. At first, the pilot was afraid to land the plane on the water. He was concerned that people in panic might damage the aircraft or overturn it during the landing. So he called for other rescue planes that were supposed to drop life rafts, water, and supplies to the people below. But later he realized that the rescue planes would not arrive for several more hours, and the sailors did not have that much time. With every passing minute, the people were losing strength, and more sharks were gathering around them. The pilot quickly made the decision to land the plane directly on the water, despite the great risk to himself. The pilot landed the plane on the water and began helping the survivors climb inside. When there was no more room left in the aircraft, the remaining survivors were tied to the wings. In this way, one small plane was able to save 56 people. Several hours later, United States military ships arrived at the site of the disaster. They began rescuing the sailors who were still alive in the water. For many people, help came too late. Out of more than 1,100 people who had been on board the ship before the disaster, only 316 survived. Let us move a few days forward and remember the secret cargo that the ship had been carrying. Despite the disaster, the operation continued. A few days later, the United States military dropped a nuclear bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. It was the first use of a nuclear weapon against people in human history. As a result of the explosion and its consequences, about 140,000 people died. Most of them were civilians who were living their ordinary lives. News of the explosion quickly spread around the world. Many people were shocked by the scale of the destruction and the number of deaths. Debates began throughout society. Some people believed that it helped bring the war to an end more quickly. Others believed that the deaths of so many civilians could not be justified. Later, newspapers began reporting that the same ship that had been lost in the disaster had delivered components for that nuclear bomb. After these articles were published, people's attitude toward the surviving sailors began to change for the worse. Instead of sympathy, many sailors faced criticism, accusations, and anger. The captain of the ship, who was among the survivors, received letters filled with accusations and threats for many years. After everything they had experienced, many sailors tried not to think about the tragedy. For many years, they could not free themselves from feelings of guilt. Many years later, the story received an unexpected continuation. In 1996, an 11-year-old student named Hunter Scott was working on a school project. He chose the story of that ship as the topic of his project. Hunter began studying documents and the accounts of the survivors. He soon learned that after the war, the captain of the ship, who had survived the disaster himself, was found guilty of the deaths of the sailors aboard the vessel. He was blamed for the loss of life, even though he had survived the tragedy along with the rest of the crew. As Hunter continued his research, he discovered evidence showing that even if every possible safety measure had been followed, it would have been nearly impossible to avoid the attack by the Japanese submarine. This meant that the captain had been blamed unfairly. Newspapers began writing about Hunter's school project, and television stations started airing reports about it. Before long, the story had once again captured the attention of people across America. Years later, the captain of the ship was officially cleared of responsibility for the disaster and was recognized as not being responsible for the shipwreck. But justice came too late. Unable to bear the weight of the accusations, the ship's captain took his own life years later in his apartment. He never lived to see the day when he would be officially declared innocent and the case against him would be reconsidered.